Good day, everyone. Welcome back to A Plateful of Insights, hosted by Revive Wellness Radio. I'm one of the hosts, Brandon, registered dietitian at Revive. I also manage Revive Wellness as well. And I'm joined here once again by Matthew. Matthew, you want to intro yourself?
Yes, I am Matthew. I'm also one of the dietitians at Revive Wellness.
So, this episode is a continuation from a previous episode that we did on men's health. We started the conversation last time funny enough, only covering one piece of the conversation that we wanted to cover. But the previous episode, if you haven't already listened to it, we covered a variety of things related to nutrition, which is an area, of course, that is our specialty, our expertise. But we wanted to take it a little bit further and go into a couple other areas that are very, very impactful when it comes to men's health that may have a role to play related to nutrition or that nutrition can impact, or nonetheless, some things that come up in conversation with clients that may be of importance to you in some capacity. Now, of course, the caveat here, um, I'm not a personal trainer, I'm not a psychologist. So some of the things we're going to talk about, um, we're going to try and keep the conversation as it relates to what we work on and what we talk about with clients as things relate to health in a general sense or as it relates to nutrition. Um, we'll see where we get to. We may have a part
Mhm.
three. I guess we'll see. All right. Now, let's dive into physical activity. So, a natural next step after nutrition being physical activity in the context of men's health. What are some things that you have seen, Matthew, or some numbers, some stats that you found interesting related to physical activity for men's health?
Yeah, so to get started with some of those general numbers, we can first start with what is generally recommended and then seeing how things stack up there with when males are getting these recommended amounts. So, starting with the general activity, Health Canada recommends at least 2.5 hours of moderate to vigorous physical activity throughout the week, and that adds up to 150 minutes, which sounds like a lot. However, it is generally recommended that we break this down into sessions of 10 minutes or more. So you can think about this as, like, let's say 30 minutes 5 days a week, uh, 50 minutes 3 days a week, or any kind of combination of 10-minute or more increments. It can even be like a few 10-minute sessions throughout the day. So just broken up in a way that works for you. And also, if we are trying to work up towards that number, then really just starting anywhere is where we want to be, and then trying to increase that number as best as we can. In addition to that, it's generally recommended that we get some form of strength training 2 days in a week included in that physical activity. So now that we have those general numbers, we can go into what the trends seem to look like. So if we start with, if we also start with steps, so a general goal or recommendation is like a nice round 10,000 steps in a day. Some other figures that we sometimes try to compare to are 7,500 steps, 8,000 steps. And one statistic that we found here is that males are in Canada are more likely to get at least 7,500 steps in a day compared to women. So 53% of men meet those numbers. Next is just the general amounts of activity. So males are more likely, both in childhood, adolescence, and adulthood, to just be generally more active throughout the week. So that isn't just the steps, but also other forms of activity, whether that be sports or running, any other just activity all put together. And if we look at younger groups, just so boys compared to girls, boys are about twice as likely to meet physical activity guidelines for children and youth age groups. So Yeah, we found it interesting there that when it comes to differences in health behaviors, it appears that in Canada, males are more likely to be more active throughout the week in a number of different ways, including, like we said, the steps, the total amount of activity throughout the week.
That one about younger group, the younger category, that 52% boys 52% are more twice as likely as girls at 26%. So that those factor of two there to meet physical activity guidelines. That's quite a disparity between those two numbers.
Yes, that one definitely stood out there. It seems that these patterns seem to develop at younger ages and then continues to an extent into adulthood in terms of um, more males are starting that regular physical activity, and then into adulthood, more men are staying. Like the gap there narrows a bit, but generally the greater activity in males is seen in those age groups as they get older as well.
I guess one thing to note, interestingly, so we have a comparison between male female, but the interesting thing is when we compare to meet physical activity guidelines, so the guidelines that that Matthew mentioned earlier. If you forget them already, go back and listen to them, because we're only just barely cracking 50% of those people actually meeting these guidelines. And I've talked to like some clients with respect to these guidelines are like, oh, that's not a problem. 2.5 hours a week. Um, doesn't seem like much, depending on the individual and where they're at in their life, I would say. But then there's other ones that are just like, man, that's when you think about everything that you're doing during the week, how do you fit that in? Uh, Breaking it up into pieces, like you mentioned, I think is a big thing. But um, I see quite a difference, although not necessarily represented here with these numbers. Boys, 52% meeting physical activity guidelines, and men older, 53% getting 7,500 plus steps daily. So I suppose we're looking at slightly different reference points, but nonetheless, I still think, based on my experience, there's a huge factor of like how do people fit that into life in a general sense, which we may get into in a few minutes. But those are interesting numbers. If you're listening to this or watching this, I'd be curious to know for you how you think you match up compared to these numbers. That'd be it for me. I know, I mean, heck, even in the past 5 years for me, I would sometimes not meet them, and then I would meet them, exceed them, not meet them, which I feel like is pretty standard. Wouldn't you say?
Yeah, I think that's pretty normal where just depending on the week, month, time of year, there are going to be times where it's easier and there are going to be times where it's busier, where other things take precedence. And I think the important thing there is that knowing, although there are specific numbers that are recommended, getting closer to that is better than not getting there at all. So it's not a matter of maybe this week I can't get the full 2.5 hours, which, like we said, is, when you think about it, actually a lot. Maybe that week it'll be 30 minutes, 15 minutes, and that is still a lot better than nothing. It's really just how the overall trajectory in the long term in terms of how those numbers are going. You don't need to meet it every single week, every single month, all the time.
Totally. Want to move on to the next piece, or is there any other stats pieces you want to dig into?
For this section, I think we're good for the general numbers. Something else I wanted to discuss was just differences when it comes to the forms of physical activity
Mm,
that people seem to get just based, or more likely to get, again, based on gender.
right. Yeah. I can see that. What did you find?
Yeah, before we go into that, I want people to think for a second, like when you think physical activity or when you think males doing physical activity, are there particular activities that come to mind? And if so, what are those? And then as we go into the numbers here, it does seem that there are differences in the activities people choose. So looks like when it comes to group activities, males are more likely to do group sports. So things like soccer, football, hockey, things like that, as opposed to more of the like indoor type of group fitness classes. So things like swing classes, things like just a general indoor aerobics class in a gym. There are significant differences that we see there in terms of the group activities that people are choosing.
Mm.
Another thing is the view of strength, the different views when it comes to strength training between men and women. So it seems to, again, statistics support that males tend to be more interested in it, either both in terms of participating and just the idealized, like how they view it. It's just viewing it more positively. I'd say is a good way to describe it.
And I think that obviously has a lot to do with someone's experience when they're growing up and at home, school, friend groups, things like that. Their influences. I mean, if there's certain things that males are more likely to participate in when they're younger, team sports as an example, there's certain influences there that they may carry forward. But I think the piece you mentioned around what people view as ideal or what people idealize has a huge play into it for a variety of reasons, whether it's social pressure, focusing on building muscle mass, or focusing on just generally body composition, wanting to be lean, cut, low body fat percentage. I mean, that's a lot of what we see in the media, marketing messages. Heck, even when people are looking at certain foods at the grocery store and then how those foods relate to physical activity or are used as alongside physical activity, billboards that you see, even things like ads for gyms and sports clubs and all this, like it all kind of points into certain directions that might explain some of this difference here. So I think there's not to say that it's not a good thing. I mean, it is what it is. But I can definitely see, and in many cases I've experienced with some clients where there's this like overemphasis on certain forms of activity and there's almost like downplay of other forms of activity. And I mean, the classic, like I focus a lot on strength training and not much cardio for whatever reason, even though there's benefits on either side from a health perspective.
Mhm.
Yeah. Would you say those are fair statements, or am I off in la la land with the clients that I see that are just not a good general representation?
No, that does seem to be fairly representative of the population in general. When it comes to whether it's the activity itself or body image, or of course the overlap between those, the um, the idealized body composition for males, again, like you said, it's guys wanting to be larger and lean, and then for women it's often there is the leanness aspect, but generally smaller and not as muscular, and that in itself being sometimes viewed as solely a masculine thing when it comes to strength training or muscle in itself.
Hmm.
So I agree that that seems to be the predominant view. And then just going on to the cardio aspect as well. Again, that being seen as somewhat gendered, whether it's something like running or even just running, walking, uh, various forms of cardiovascular activity. That is my experience as well.
And I guess for a lot of these types of general things, a lot of you are probably listening or watching to this going, well, that's not at all me. And that's fine. I mean, obviously, it's not always the case where people fit into what's, we can say, quote unquote, the norms or the trends or the averages and things that we see within the current data and the statistics that we have access to. So it also depends on, like, heck, where you live and part of the world, climate, all that stuff. So it's not always going to be across the board um, the same for everybody. But and that's okay, because we also, considering what we mentioned earlier about the recommendations, sometimes they're the idealized piece can get in the way in terms of what you're wanting to do for goals related to physical activity. If you're trying to aim for 2.5 hours a week, and what you view as an ideal, let's say for whatever reason you really wanted to build muscle and you wanted to focus on strength training, but you don't enjoy it that much, well, that means it's probably not going to be something you're going to be able to do long term. Maybe you're a runner, or you just really like cycling or rowing, or whatever those combinations are, and you just like cardiovascular or endurance type exercise more. Well, it's probably more likely that you're going to meet those recommendations on a week to week basis because it's stuff that you enjoy. So don't forget about those things alongside all of this, because some of this conversation is more so just explaining the current state of things right now, not necessarily saying that these things are good or not good per se.
Right. Yeah, when it comes to trying to set goals for physical activity, I agree with what Brandon said in terms of trying to consider if the goals that you're aiming for or the activities you're choosing are you're doing it because it's things that you enjoy, or do you feel that this is the type of activity you're supposed to do for some reason, whether that is or is not gendered. It could be more like it could be gender, it could be even just geography, like where you live and what is normal in or what's common in your social groups and your surroundings. It could be, yeah, what friends are doing, and just assessing if these are things that truly motivate you to be more active, because having that type of internal motivation for health goals does tend to be something that people find easier to stick to long term and enjoy while they're doing it. And another piece on the choosing of activities, I think it's also important to note that whether when we think in broad categories, like let's say cardio exercise or strength training exercise, these encompass a lot of things. So cardio does not mean like training for a 5K or a 10K or anything like that. It can be brisk walking, it can be riding a bike, it could be skipping with a rope, it could be tons of things. It doesn't need to just be one thing, and that is
Cross country
something that
skiing.
yeah.
Cross country skiing, man, I tried cross country skiing for the first time a couple years ago, and my gosh, was it gnarly hard. Like, I've never done it before, so it
Yeah, that's a
yep.
hard one.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And like how we were mentioning before about things like sports, team sports being a more common choice for males, things like that are a form of cardiovascular exercise. If you're playing basketball and you're running back and forth through the court and jumping, that is a form of cardiovascular activity that does go into that 150 minutes that we mentioned.
There is I think some areas like you mentioned, Matthew, around like the goals and how they relate to team activities and things like this. A common one that I hear from more so people that are in their late 20s, early 30s, and kind of going into your late 30s, 40s, 50s is recreational sports. And depending on where you live, of course, and your access to such activities, a common thing that comes up that is a kind of a domino effect of sorts is recreational team sports like hockey or basketball or softball, slow pitch, baseball, what have you. And there's a lot wrapped up in those things because those are really, really good um, activities from an enjoyability perspective. Um, you know, they might not be too expensive depending on where you live, and if you have the gear already for that particular sport. But one thing that comes with those types of scenarios is, okay, this is a great opportunity for some really good physical activity, potentially both strength and cardiovascular, or both. But the social aspect of that part kind of comes into play sometimes too. That's where the term beer league comes into play for a lot of people, where the consumption of alcohol, either during or after events like that, is kind of stacked on top of those situations. So we got a really good opportunity for physical activity on with potential for a lot of pressure to engage in those types of scenarios and activities afterwards, whether it's alcohol or going out for wings or fast food or whatever else. It's just a common thing that happens. Also, not obviously not always the case, but I've talked to a lot of my clients that really enjoy those types of recreational activities that are on a team basis, but they struggle handling the stuff after. And they're like, I still want to go and hang out with the boys, but I don't want to I don't want to drink as much as, and then there's that whole, so that the whole thing around goal setting, if you don't consider that piece, then it's not to say that the solution isn't like, oh, I just don't go. Well, it could be depending on the scenario. But you open the door for a lot of conversations and communication with other people that you may need to have. And if you don't consider that part, then the goals that you want to set around it may not necessarily pan out the way that you want them to.
Yeah, in situations like that, like using like the drinks after the activity as an example, if that is something that maybe someone is concerned about, there's a good chance they're not the only one in that activity that feels a similar way. And even
True.
just mentioning some kind of alternative could be something that others on the team are also open to.
That's a good point. Yeah. It's, I would think that definitely the case. You rarely
Mm.
is the case in a group of enough people where you're the only one thinking a certain thing.
Yeah,
Usually doesn't happen.
everyone but you. Yeah, it's
Yeah,
unlikely.
very unlikely. All right. I'm looking at our notes here. This is kind of funny. We bounced around to like boing 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 to different pieces. What have we not covered yet, Matthew?
One thing I wanted to go back to from a previous point on the focus on body composition
Mm-hmm.
was just the so in terms of the just like the marketing and media aspect of some of this, that historically it's been more of an issue with marketing towards women and girls. But
Mm.
I've noticed that just in recent years, as we've moved more towards like online type of marketing, as opposed to previously seeing these things in like magazines or in other physical print ads or physical media, is quite similar or quite analogous types of marketing in terms of just certain unrealistic or modified standards that are promoted in some of this advertising. And I have noticed this just being a larger issue in the male population as well as in younger males, like similarly in past years and decades with younger girls.
Yeah, that's a fair point. I think that's a really fair point. I mean, it always changes, usually depending on the context, what's going on in the world. The medium that is used, I think, is very impactful. Yeah, marketing is weird. It's um, it's one of those things where you don't necessarily realize the impact that it has on your thoughts and behaviors, and not only of you but everybody around you, and then how that shapes further thoughts and behaviors. Uh, if you're not aware of any of those things in a general sense or in a specific sense, then those are some of the reasons that we commonly see with people where you're trying to make changes in your behaviors or your routine or your lifestyle, and you feel like you're constantly like in an uphill battle. Those are some of the reasons why, is because there's external factors that are at play that are usually in place to make money in some way, shape, or form. That's usually the case. Um, and they're very impactful. That so much so that we don't even sometimes recognize that these things are there.
Mhm. Yeah, and a lot of these, just to relate back to nutrition, are marketed as like a supplement or product that you need to enhance your physical activity or to yeah, look a certain way, or yeah, just making it seem like you need this to achieve your goals. When it comes to nutritional supplements, how do you normally navigate those types of conversations with your sports clients?
Oh, I'm chuckling because as soon as you dove into sports and supplements, I'm just like, look at any protein powder website, like 95% of them. And there's this people there on the website that are like jacked, super jacked,
Completely natural.
musculars. Yeah, completely natural, right? Like they definitely used that supplement only, and that was the only thing that got them to that point, right? Like, no, I'm shaking my head here. How do I normally go about supplements? Anybody that I'm talking to supplements about, obviously, when it comes to my sports clients, there's more things at play, like what I just mentioned. There's a lot of factors influencing somebody's decision around supplementation. Things like marketing. If you're looking at specific athletes that are taking certain things and how that influences thoughts, behaviors. Um, if there's shifts in the marketplace in terms of different products that become available and how popular those may be, and if those are on social media, like there's TikTok videos about them or reels about them or YouTube videos about them, that may play a role. So being aware of all of those things, and usually what I do in sessions with clients is if they bring up those types of things with me, is we actually just dive right into them. I'll bring up the web page for the product and we'll talk about it. And there's a few consistent things that I look for in supplements that you can apply in any case. Is For any supplement that you want to take, is do you actually need to take it? Can you get it from food? And can you consistently get enough of it from food for various reasons? Because if there's things going on there, chances are you can get more bang for your buck. Because when we're talking food versus supplements purified nutrients in most cases. So you're going to be getting a lot of one thing, but you're going to miss the array of also non-nutrient things that are in foods. So looking at food, is there an actual gap that needs to be filled with a supplement for convenience reasons or practical reasons or allergy reasons or whatever else? Is the supplement good quality? Has it been tested by a third party? And there's some websites that you can check out: Informed Sport, Informed Choice, and NSF Certified for Sport are good resources to search up supplements. And you can also look at supplement websites and containers to see those markings. Because really, we're just looking for quality, making sure that the supplement is uh, actually what it says it's on the label, and it also doesn't have any contaminants or banned substances or high levels of heavy metals, anything that would cause any adverse health effects aside from whatever the supplement is itself. Is good to be aware of. If you get past that part, are you taking the right amount of the supplement? Usually for a supplement, we're looking at a specific effect or a specific impact or to fill a certain gap. Usually there is a certain amount required in order to do that, from something like creatine to protein to caffeine to micronutrients, vitamins, minerals, you name it. So we got presence of a gap, quality, testing, dose, and related to all of those things, of course, is tolerance of that product. Can you actually, do you have any gut issues with it? Does it cause any adverse reaction, like makes you not feel good, anything like that? Particularly if you're using it for exercise purposes. More important for sure if you're using it for competitions or races or events that require a high level of performance mentally and physically. And is it something that you can take, and if you're not sure, practice with it. That's also a good factor too, is practicing with taking it, practicing with how to take it, different forms of taking it, times. Sometimes it doesn't matter what time you take them, sometimes it does. But many cases, taking supplements consistently, so whatever you need to do in order to make that happen. But you also don't want to get into a situation where there's a high stakes situation and you're just trying a new supplement for the first time and it doesn't go well, and there goes your half marathon place, because all of a sudden you just feel like throwing up or something like that. So all of those factors can play a role at various points. Most of them are also applicable to people that are not necessarily athletes per se. A lot of people take protein powder or pre-workout powder. The same applies. Um, I would apply the same exact thing because all of them still matter to some extent. Everybody wants to feel good while you're working out or exercising. You don't want to feel like crap, and you actually want it to do something, and you want to make it worth the money that you're paying for it. So, in a nutshell, that's where I go with the conversation.
That makes sense for the main points there. Just to add onto a couple of the things you mentioned, with the aspect you said in terms of finding a gap, I think an important thing to emphasize there is that you're finding a gap that is applicable specifically to the activity that you're doing. Because there
Yes.
are going to be some supplements that we would say are effective for their intended purpose, but that intended purpose may or may not apply to your specific activity. So just making sure
Yep.
that that match is there.
Yep.
On the point about third party testing, this is going to be especially important if you are an athlete that is at a more professional or competitive level where you yourself may be drug tested. And there have been some instances, one even in the last few weeks, with athletes who seemingly unintentionally take a tainted substance that did not have this third party testing, and then you fail your drug test whether or not it was you did that on purpose. If it's found in your body, it is they assume that you did receive some kind of advantage, whether or not that was on purpose, whether or not it was even an effective amount of that tainted substance. You still forfeit wins, awards, potentially monetary awards for failing that kind of testing. So
Mm-hmm.
those types of certifications and third-party testing are extremely important, especially in those cases. And then lastly, on the part about just knowing about the effective amount, when we have supplements where something like that is known, so like creatine as mentioned before, those are supplements that generally tend to have a greater degree of evidence for them because we know enough to say this amount is going to give you this intended benefit. So stuff like that is important. And if there is a specific amount, knowing as well if this is a more cumulative thing that you would need to take, let's say, daily to meet a certain total amount in the body, again, something like creatine as an example, versus something that's more of maybe an acute effect or short-term effect, like something like caffeine, for example. So knowing the effective amount, the effective timing for it, and the effective, you could say, scheduling of when you're taking it. If it's leading up to the event, or some cumulative amount, or if it's again a more of a short-term thing. And if it is something like caffeine, even considering things like tapering, so that you are going to get a better effect closer to that event if that is the intended goal.
Agree 100%. Agree 100%. You are always responsible for whatever you put in your body, regardless of if you know what's in there or not. Hopefully, if this is relevant to you, especially for drug testing, you have good people around you that are helping you with those things. There's if that really matters to you, and I mean, there's third party testing that has different levels of let's say rigor to them. Go towards informed sport or go towards NSF certified for sport. Those two certifications have more strict testing. That's done on the products. They test more often, and it's you can be a little bit you can be more confident that the product actually is legit and doesn't have any kind of banned substances in it. That same is relevant for the
Mm-hmm.
average person and also for athletes, but basically any human being, because there's been cases of things like liver issues or kidney issues that just pop up. And there's no way to predict these things, to say if they're actually going to happen with a particular substance or not. Um, and the question that I always get from clients around testing is that, well, this supplement and it's newer, it doesn't have testing. Is it still a good supplement? And my answer always is, I don't know. I don't have any confidence in the supplement. It may be a good product. I just don't know because there's been no testing done And sometimes the case may be where the product is so new, they're just starting out, they don't have money for testing. And usually testing costs a lot of money. Like NSF certified for sports certification is very costly. You're usually going to find those in more premium products. And that's why, because it costs money. And obviously, the manufacturer is going to make the price point such that it represents that. Um, but yeah, I always say it could be a good supplement if it's not tested. I just don't know that, so I can't recommend it, and I leave it at that. It's like because there's always options. There's tons and tons of options from any supplement, any line, any formulation. There's enough options available that you can get good quality things, and also things that taste good too. Like I've heard too many stories of people that tried protein powders and they just were disgusting. And I'm like, in today's 2024, as of this recording, heck, even 5 years ago, there's no need for supplements that taste like crap. It's just we're past that point, I think.
Yeah. Yeah. And on the cost point, just to wrap this part up, it is more expensive, but one thing to consider in addition to, of course, all of the testing and everything we mentioned is with that more costly tested product, there's greater certainty that what is written on the label of the bottle is actually what is inside in the
Yep.
amount that is claimed to be inside. So there's a lower chance of you or sorry, there's a better with the tested product, there's a better chance that you are actually getting what you pay for, even with that premium cost that comes with it.
Nothing like purchasing a creatine product from Amazon and it actually ends up being cornstarch. Wouldn't that be fun, right? I've heard of that before. Not a good way to spend your hard-earned money, that's for sure. All right. Any points we want to go through that we haven't covered yet, Matthew?
I think those are all of the points that I had. Is there anything else you wanted to touch on before we wrap up?
I think that covers it. I mean, there's a lot of points here that we could continue expanding on and giving other examples for, but I think this lays the stage quite nicely for a part three. I think you had a very good hunch at the beginning of this episode that we'll probably need a part three. And I'm going to agree with you on that one. We're going to go through the next pieces if you're interested. In listening to the next episode, we're going to go into mental health. We're going to talk about social well being, a few other pieces related to those things. As you've probably noticed, a lot of today's conversation around physical activity ties into the stuff that we talked about last time around nutrition. It's kind of hard to segment and silo them. That's not really how we approach things at Revive, anyways. So, but we're going to continue the conversation about those pieces next time in a part three, and we hope to see you there, or we hope that you'll listen or watch. If you're not necessarily watching our face, we'll hope you'll be there. Thanks for joining and thanks for watching. We'll talk to you soon.